Today I'm going to do some dolls housing from my mum's garden. Because it's such a beautiful day, I decided that I would sit outside and sit with her for some company and do some miniature work. So before I start, I thought you might want a little look at the flowers and some of the pretty things that are in her garden. There's a hive there, I don't know if you can see it, but I saw it and thought it was amazing, so I filmed it. This makes it look like it was really windy, it wasn't. It was a really hot day with just a nice gentle breeze. So, one of my lovely YouTube subscribers had asked me about miniature Tudor tankards for using to drink out of. And they're something that I hadn't really looked into before, so I researched them on the internet and saw that they were often made out of leather. So I decided that I wanted to have a go at making them. Now, my mum had loads of scraps of material and I said I need something that looks like leather. And she gave me an insole of a shoe. So I used this leatherette from the insole of a shoe and decided to make a circle. I'd looked at Tudor tankards on the internet and it looked as if they were sort of not a cylinder shape, but they would sort of lean inwards, a bit like a cone with the top chopped off. So I decided to try to make this shape. Now, to make the circle, I didn't have anything to draw around, so I was improvising as I did this. Of course, I didn't have all of the things that I would normally have at home, but my mum provided me with what she had. So I decided to make a circle by popping the pin in the middle, attaching a piece of string, and then scoring in with another pin. I was being really careful not to scratch the table underneath. There was some padding underneath this insole, so don't worry mum, I didn't scratch your table. As you can see, I did a really poor job of drawing a circle, but it was alright. I decided it would do. So I cut out my circular shape. I was kind of making this up as I was going along. I wasn't exactly sure what I was doing. As you can see, the little pinhole wasn't in the centre, so I halved the circle and halved it again so that it was in quarters, and then this helped me to see where the centre was. And I had a look at what shape it would make if I rolled it up. Now this to me looked too much like a cone, so I decided to cut the middle out there and then so that I could have a look more at what shape it made, and I decided to actually make it into a cylinder shape because it just didn't look right bent in like that. So I used this thick cotton, which I think might be for stitching leather. The leatherette that I was using was really thick, so I was hoping that this cotton would hold it. However, by using thick cotton, it did mean that the hole that the needle was puncturing needed to be quite big to let the cotton through. As you'll see in a second, as I used the needle, it was really hard to pull through where the eye of the needle was with the cotton. So this meant that for each hole, I actually needed it to be a little bit bigger. So what I decided to do was use the thin needle to make the piercing, and then I took a thicker pin which I then pushed through the same hole to make the hole a bit bigger before putting the thread through. So basically I pierced all of the holes before doing the sewing. Meanwhile, my mum was sat next to me and she had some miniature makes to be getting on with. So she's in the middle of making a little chair. I'm assuming this might be for Toad of Toad Hall, but she said that she needs 8 of these beads and she only has 4, so we need to go out and look for them before she can finish off a chair. She also has this little dressmaker's stand, so she was just making a base for that so that it could stand up, and then she was going to make a fancy little dress to go onto the dressmaker's stand. I'll keep checking in with her through the video to show you what she's up to. So once I'd finished puncturing my holes, I was ready to sew. So if I just hold it up to the light, you might be able to see there that the holes are already pierced. This made it a lot easier to push the needle through. I say a lot easier. I got tangled and knotted many times whilst I was doing this. It was fiddly because it was so small. I decided to do an overstitch. I knew that this would mean that you'd be able to see the stitching, but I was alright with that. As you can probably tell, it was quite a difficult task, and it was especially difficult because I was trying to do it in front of the camera so that you could see, but with it being so tiny it kept going out of focus, I kept moving away from the camera. I hope you don't mind the footage, I hope it's alright. In the end I actually put it over this quick unpick packaging because it just held it a little bit more in shape as I was sewing it. I thought it looked a bit like a miniature boot, which has made me wonder whether that's something I should make for my doll's house. When it was stitched all along, I slit it off the quick unpick, and then I needed to think about the handle. So I cut a thin strip from my original piece. I punctured some holes in before starting to sew. And then I sewed the handle on. However, I got a tiny little knot in the thread, and this took ages to unpick. I decided to unpick it rather than trimming the thread off just because I didn't want to waste any thread. So let's go back and have a look at how my mum's doing. So this little dress stand, I'm assuming, is going to go into her doll's house. She has a couple of doll's houses and I've asked her if I can film them for you to show you them. When I'd sewed the handle on, it was time to sew a little knot in the end, and then I trimmed it off, and of course it now needed a base. Before I did that, I just neatened off the top because it looked a little bit uneven. By the way, you're watching this video of me making this tankard. I'm going to make a second one in this video too, so I would like to know in the comments which one's your favourite because they're both very, very different. At this stage I was only considering making one, especially because it was so difficult to sew. I thought I don't really want to make more than one of these, but when I woke up the next morning I decided that I wanted to make a second. I'll explain why later. So to make the base, I decided it would be far, far too difficult to sew it, and I think that if I'd have tried to sew it, it would have really made it look messy. So instead, I cut out the circle and then decided to push it through the cylinder because the leatherette is quite thick, so I didn't think that it would come out. I think it will hold its position. I'm intrigued to know which room of Mum's doll's house this dress is going in. Beautiful. So once I'd pushed the base through, this is what it looked like. And that was my first finished Tudor leather tankard. I wasn't sure if the handle was a bit big. Didn't look quite right, but I was alright with it. It's the effort that counts. I know it doesn't look perfect, but I like the fact that it looks handmade, and obviously I wasn't there in the Tudor era, I don't know, but I feel like some of their tankards would have also looked handmade. So moving on, I woke up the next morning ready to put this tankard into my doll's house, and I googled tankards to see how well it matched a real one, and then I realised that the shape just really wasn't right. So I thought I would have a second go. In this Anavin train carriage book nook kit, I have some sort of sticky back leatherette, which is used on the benches that I just showed you there. And I wondered if I had some offcuts and some leftover bits that I might be able to use instead of stitching the thick leatherette that I'd been using for the first tankard. So I did find some spare bits, or at least I'm hoping they're spare. I can't see that there's anything printed on this bit, so I don't think that I need it for anything else in the kit. So I cut off my offcuts and decided to have a second go. So there's my first one. And for this second one, I'm going to try much harder to make it the correct shape. So I don't think that the leatherette will be thick enough to hold its shape itself. So I'm going to use some of this card, and I started by drawing around my salt and pepper pot for the circle. That's a much better circle than yesterday, isn't it? And again, just like yesterday, I halved the circle and halved it again to find the centre point. And I cut the centre out. And then I unfolded it and cut a slit so that I could start to roll it. Now what I found with the card was that it was too stiff to roll it without it kind of looking like it had corners in it. So I wrapped it around a pencil just to kind of loosen up the fibres a little bit in the card. I trimmed the top a little bit because it seemed to be going uphill. It almost looked like a jug. And then it was time to add this leatherette. So I didn't want to waste any of it, so I just cut a piece that was the size that I needed. And handily, it was sticky back and it was easy to peel off the back of it. And I repeated this on the other side so that both sides were covered. And then I just rubbed around the edges to make sure that it had stuck nice and securely. I did this on both sides and then I cut it out. At this end, I decided to just peel it back a little bit and leave one edge where it was slightly bigger. Because it was sticky, I thought maybe it would help to attach it when I curved it all the way around. Now this did work to help it to stick, but I didn't like how it looked, especially because it was pointy. So I actually decided to then trim this end off. But in trimming it off, it meant that it then started pinging away again because it didn't have enough to stick it together. So this was a bit of a problem. I decided to use a strip just to cover this rough edge, which I was going to do anyway, and I hoped that this might help just to stick it together. But as you can see, it didn't work because it's all separated. I didn't really expect that it would work, to be fair, because it was such a thin strip. Before putting glue on, I put 2 sticky bits of leather on the inside like this, just so that it had a little bit of extra sticky back to try and hold it in place. So I popped those on the inside, curved it around and pressed it together, and also added a little line of glue. I also added a teeny tiny bit of glue to this strip just to make sure that it held in place really securely, especially because I'd already attached it and peeled it off once, so it was starting to lose its stickiness. As you can probably tell, this was all very fiddly with it being so tiny. So to neaten off the edges, I then added this rim along the base, and I also wanted to put one along the top. Now in hindsight, I should have put the base on before this rim to hide one of the edges. So if I was to make one of these again, I would add the base before adding this. So I did exactly the same to the top, so I've turned my tankard upside down here because I was running it along the table just to make sure that it was completely flat. Now to make the handle, so I folded a strip over so that you couldn't see the underside of it. And I'd studied the shape of the tankards, and not only were they sort of this slanted shape, but their handles have quite a fancy design to them, which I hadn't managed to achieve on my first tankard. So I rolled the top, and then the bottom bit I used the tweezers to roll it in the opposite direction. By the way, I still intend to use both tankards, so even though I'm making a completely different one here, I think that the black tankard, it suits Mole in my doll's house, and I think that this tankard, which is a little more fancy, suits Ratty. Then I just added a tiny bit of glue to stick the handle on, obviously always being really careful because I don't want the glue to be all fierce. And once the top bit was stuck on, it was time to then glue the bottom bit. And then to make the bottom of the tankard, so this is the bit that I should have done before putting the rim on. I drew around it, cut it out. And I also drew inside it and cut this out too. I thought it was important that I had some leatherette on the inside as well, because if you looked down into the tankard and this bit wasn't inside it, you would see the sort of gluey white part of the leatherette, and I didn't think that would look very good. Of course, it really should have a drink in it, which I could use resin or something like that for, but I'm not an expert on resin. I know it's quite dangerous to use, so yeah. Okay, so as you can see there, when I've stuck it on, you can see the white rim underneath. So I gently sort of pressed it inwards and upwards a little bit underneath, and tried to squeeze the edge underneath the strip that I'd added at the bottom. But you could still see a tiny bit of the white. So I have these watercolour felt tips, and there was one that I thought might be an ideal colour, just to fill in these white bits. So I tested it on a little bit of leftover leatherette, and I felt that it was the ideal colour. So I just really carefully used this, I don't know, it's like an aqua felt tip, I'm not really sure. I used this to just fill in the white bits, which I think finished it off nicely. And there we go. Another tankard, a very different tankard, I think. So let's put them into the doll's house in a second, and I would love to know which one you like better. So do you like number one, the first one that I made? Or do you like the second one? That is the brown leatherette that I've made in the second half of the video. Please let me know in the comments. I'm keeping both of them. I like them both. I think they suit the characters. But I would like to know which ones you like best. I feel like the first one is a little bit more rustic, whilst the second one is a bit more precise. There we go, here's some pictures of my doll's house anyway, or pictures of the tankards in the doll's house. When I opened my doll's house, the things on the dining room table were everywhere. So I think I might have picked up my doll's house whilst it's had everything inside it and moved it a little bit, and everything had shuffled around. So I did a little bit of rearranging, took some photos, and I'd love to know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. I have another video which I'm hoping to post maybe tomorrow. It'll definitely be soon because it's nearly ready. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!